Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Writing Your Writing. I'm your host, Mr. Gessel, and today I want to talk to you about editorials and columns. So, for those of you who have me as a teacher, you know that I teach an introductory journalism course, and we spent all year talking about how to write a news article. And one of the most difficult things, as you know, if you're one of my students, is to learn to write in an objective style, to write without bias, without opinion, not in first person. So I saved teaching editorials and columns for the spring semester as we approach the end of the year, because it's completely different from everything that I've taught you to do before. Everything I've taught you not to do, you now have to do for editorials and columns. So we're going to talk about what are editorials and what are columns and how to structure them. So first of all, an editorial means that opinions are okay. News articles, as you know, have to be perfectly objective. No first person, no opinions. Editorials have to be subjective. You're putting forward your position or your stand. Editorials also are the voice of the publication, and you'll see in just a few minutes, an editorial is different from a column in that the editorial speaks for the entire publication. So if I write for the New York Times and the New York Times runs an editorial, the editorial is the position, the official position of everybody at the New York Times. And editorials are actually not written in first person. They're written in third person. They're not coming from one single person's perspective. They're usually written by a board. You'll have an editorial board, say at the New York Times, and everybody puts their heads together and decides what position they want to stake out on a particular topic. And so it's more of a group thing, groupthink. And then editorials are usually persuasive. Sometimes they're informative, and sometimes there's something totally different. But most of the time, they're persuasive. So that's what we're going to focus on in this class. The column, on the other hand, um, I should say also for columns, opinions are most certainly okay. In fact, you need to have a good, strong opinion for a good column. Columns are usually written in first person. Most of the time, a column is written by, a person. And very often, that person's picture will appear at the top of the column. And for columns, the big difference here is that there are a huge number of possibilities for what topic you can write about for a column. You can write about food, music, culture, fashion, really whatever you want is fair game for your column. And very often the column will be reoccurring. So I, for instance, when I was in my news reporter days, I wrote a music column. It was called the Blue Jukebox, and I would write about different events and different songs and really anything that I wanted as long as it fell under the broad umbrella of music. So let's break it down. These are the two things that I want to focus on for this class. The two types of assignments that you can write for journalism are, one, the persuasive editorial. Again, as I mentioned before, an editorial can be more than just persuasive, but usually it is persuasive, so that's what we'll focus on. And let me share the structure of the persuasive editorial with you, and you're going to see it's very similar to how you would structure, say, a persuasive essay. In fact, there isn't a fundamental difference between the two except for audience. So you're going to have an attention-grabbing introduction. You'll have a thesis. This will be your position. It doesn't have to look like an essay thesis, but it's still a thesis nonetheless, which is just your argument or position. You're going to have support for that position in the editorial. So that could be text to text, meaning you could cite another article or a written source. Text to world, you could cite something that's happened in the news or something that's happening in society. Text to self, meaning you could cite something that happened to you or share an anecdote. Then good editorials always acknowledge the opposition. Sometimes they concede something, they give up some ground. Sometimes they refute the opposition, but usually they want to address the opposition in some way. And then you have an effective conclusion. You can use what's called an echo conclusion, where you tie your conclusion back to your intro. Very often, a good persuasive editorial will have a call to action, where you're asking your audience to do something. So that is the basic structure for a persuasive editorial. A column is a little bit more slippery. So at first glance, students think, oh, a column is much easier. It's first person. I can write about whatever I want. But the structure of a column, you kind of have to find your own way more than you do for a persuasive editorial, which makes it trickier. Sometimes it can be more fun to write, but sometimes, I'll be honest, they're much more difficult. So a column will also have an attention-grabbing introduction. Any good piece of writing where the reader isn't forced to read it tends to have a good introduction. you're going to have some type of a nut graph in a column. But what's different about how we've written nut graphs in articles? In an article, a nut graph comes typically right after the lead. A nut graph for a column can really happen anywhere in the column. You might have it toward the end of the column. You might have it somewhere in the middle. It can fall almost anywhere. And then you're going to have some type of support for your position. So, for instance, if you're doing a food column, you need to describe the food in a way that fits the thesis. So, if my thesis is the food at McDonald's, say, is low price but delicious, my descriptions of the food are going to be trying to prove that McDonald's food is in fact low priced and delicious, etc. And then you'd have examples to fit your thesis. I say example from life to fit thesis. Let's say my column is a life column and it's about how people are crazy. So I might have a description of the way people drive or something like that. And that'll fit my thesis that people are crazy. And then, of course, you're going to have some type of conclusion. An echo conclusion could be fine, or perhaps just a clincher statement. But you see that the column, there are many more pieces in motion. There are many more things that you can do. And so in order to get the gist of what a good column is like, it's important just to read some columns. So that is that. So today what we've talked about on Writing Your Writing are editorials and columns, and I've just talked to you briefly about the difference between the two, and I've showed you some ways of structuring editorials and columns.